Okay. Am I good? Great. And so we have people from all over the state coming to learn together. And again, this is a community process, right? Our hope is that we provide a forum for you to have really positive and powerful conversations with one another and learn from one another. You're the experts in administrating your school communities. We're not. What we're going to do is try to ask provocative questions and turn you on to some resources that might be useful as you create what looks like innovative Utah schools in the STEM space across the state in different places. So the kind of impetus for this entire event, this 5-day event this year, is to provide a forum for you to innovate within the STEM space. So before we jump in to our keynote, I want to make sure that everyone's familiar with what the resources look like. There's 3 different places that you can get to this Google folder. If you accepted the calendar invite, you can go to the calendar invite, and there's a link in the calendar invite that will get you to the participant resources. On the back of your name tag is this little guy. If you use any sort of QR reader, you can get to the Google folder via this guy. And then you can also go to the bit.ly, which is STEM I4A, Institute for Administrators, fold. Any of those processes will get you to the folder, and you're going to need some resources in the folder starting in just a few minutes. So if you would take just a moment right now and see if you could navigate your way to that folder, we'd be most appreciative.
We're going to have to move that microphone maybe a little bit lower. They said there's some feedback between the two.
Oh, is it? And this one?
No, you know what I'm wondering is if we're too close to that microphone at the podium.
Oh, it could be.
So maybe when
Yeah, I don't know if that one's on or not.
it is on.
Okay.
I think that's the feedback they're hearing.
When you get into the participant folders, you'll see something that looks like this. And so all of the resources that we're going to be talking about today are in that day 1 folder. And when you jump in, you'll see our agenda, which we'll be talking about in a second. You'll have access to all the slides that are not part of Doug's presentation. We'll provide Doug's slides after the fact. We'll put it in this folder. The Insight Tracker, which I'll talk about in just a second, and then the 2 papers that we'll be talking about later on. But what I need everyone to do now is to go into one of these 2 cohorts. When you signed up on Midas, you signed up for either the Provo cohort or the Salt Lake City cohort. I need you to get into the folder that you signed up for. If you don't remember which one you signed up for, then you can get into whichever one that you want to, but you need to remember which one you're getting into. When you jump in, you're going to see 25 documents that look exactly the same. They all have editing access for you. And what I need everyone in the room to do is to identify one of those documents and change the number to your name. So instead of saying one's STEM Institute Insight Tracker Day 1, it's going to say John Doe's STEM Institute Tracker Day 1. This is going to be a little bit messy, but take just a couple of minutes and identify one of those trackers for yourself. I would suggest that not everyone chooses the number 1.
It's gone.
And if anyone's having trouble, raise your hand. Someone will come around and help. Say again?
Bitly back up.
Yes. Once the internet decides it's going to let me. Okay. So hopefully everyone is either has an insight tracker for themselves or is on their way to having one. Question?
No, I
Or just help? Awesome. Melissa, would you mind jumping in? So these insight trackers are for you. We're going to be using them in several different ways. If you'd like to take notes digitally, feel free to jump in to those documents and take notes right along with the titles within the documents. But then there's also this circumstance where a lot of people like to take notes on a piece of paper. This is also great. What we would ask that you do is you take a photo of those notes and insert it into your insight tracker. What we want to do is provide a space that not only has all the resources that we talk about during our time at the STEM Institute, but also has a compendium of your insights and your experiences that's available in that same folder. So that's our kind of vision with the insight tracker. We'll be talking about more as the day goes on, but I want to make sure everyone is clear about how this works. Any questions on getting into the Google folder or insight trackers? Great. So our kind of goal today is about surfacing ideas connected to STEM and what our entire institute's going to be about. These 5 bullets are the objectives that we're going to be pursuing throughout the 5 days in the STEM Institute. We're hopeful that by the end of our time together that you'll be able to define STEM in terms of each individual discipline as well as collectively, to use STEM to promote access and engagement for every student, to identify high-quality instruction in each of the STEM disciplines, to leverage your knowledge of high-quality instruction and how integrated STEM can flourish in your community, and then maybe most importantly, apply the insights learned within the STEM Institute to your context, whatever that looks like. And so again, our expectation for this process isn't that you're a master at any of these topics as soon as we talk about them. In classrooms, when we talk about a standard with a student, we don't expect that they have mastered it as soon as we mention it. That's why in contemporary high-quality instruction, we see students touching on standards multiple times. The same should be true for professional learning within the adult context. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is that we're going to see kind of objectives and these ideas several times throughout the STEM Institute. Some of you have been a part of the STEM Institute previously, and so you'll see things that you've touched on before. And so our hope is that with each touch point, you have this opportunity to gain more insight about those ideas. Today, we'll be focusing on the top 2. Defining STEM in terms of each individual discipline, and to use STEM to promote access engagement for every student. Melissa, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I'm.
Great.
Thank you. Your help solve this problem.
Cool. So this is what our time together is going to look like for today. We're going to be spending most of our morning with engaging with Doug on creating a vision for STEM education. We'll go to lunch, which will be provided. We'll talk about access engagement in STEM right after lunch. And then the importance of the practices, the science and engineering practices, as well as the standards of mathematical practice. And then finally, we'll look at this tool for STEM observations and have an opportunity to use it within a video context of a classroom that has some interesting things going on. We'll finish the day by breaking into our cohorts and talking about what days 2, 3, and 4 are going to look like, both from a networking perspective as well as a content perspective. And so with that, we'd like to transition our morning to our keynote speaker, and Mr. Ricky Scott for his introduction.
I love that they asked me to introduce Doug. So Doug is a really good friend of mine. I've known him now for several years, and so Jolie and I were actually working with him. But to give you some context, Doug was born in Minnesota to two, I dropped it.
I got it.
My bad. Doug was born in Minnesota to two educators. His mother is in higher education. Her father is a principal for most of his life. Doug's education led him also into education. So in his background, he taught everything from kindergarten all the way through middle school. Middle school, he taught both science and mathematics. After that, he became a curriculum instructor in his school district at the time, working with teachers all over the place, which led him into the State Department. There, he was just huge in the STEM work that he did all over the state. It was fun to follow him on Twitter. And see the amazing work he was doing all over the state of Minnesota, and he's been doing that now for several years. Since that time, he's also been involved in several national organizations and very important kind of groups that put together some pretty amazing STEM documentation, some of which I think we're probably going to go over here in this sometime throughout this academy as well. But I'm really excited to be able to work with Doug, and I'm excited to be introducing him to you. So Doug Paulson.
Okay.
You hold that.
I hold this?
I'll set this.
Okay. I'm getting all hooked up, I guess.
There you go, buddy.
Perfect. Great, thanks. Well, it's great to be here, and I guess if I could be anywhere, Utah's the place to be at. I have gotten a chance to work with Jolie and Ricky and Sarah Young and now several others here in the state, and just have such high regard to the work that you all are doing, and really the focus around STEM. And so I'm honored to be here to engage with you here this morning. I have a few things to kind of share that we've done nationally and we've done in my state of Minnesota. But I think, as we engage in these types of activities, really the learning comes from within, and the amount of knowledge that we have in this room is spectacular. And so we'll have some hands-on activities that we'll have you engage with, and it will be a good opportunity to learn from each other and really start to build some community in here as well. And so over the course of the next couple hours here, really the focus is around how are we creating a vision for STEM. STEM is this acronym that's out there, but it's so much more than that. But as we engage with this, one of the concerns that I oftentimes get is, as we have schools that have identified STEM as the answer that they really want to start to focus their work around, to focus their strategic plan around, and quite frankly, has missed the first part of it, and that is answering, what's the question we're trying to answer with STEM? And so why is it that STEM is what we have highlighted as an answer? And don't get me wrong, I think it's a fantastic way to engage students. I think it connects on a lot of economic needs. I think it's opportunity to really connect learning across multiple different disciplines. It has all kinds of different value. But until we actually really understand STEM and think about what is it that we're trying to answer, what is it we're trying to solve through STEM, I think that the exercise really becomes a challenge. And so to start with, I'd like you to think, and either on your computer or on a piece of paper, I'd like you to reflect upon that answer. Why STEM? Think about it from not your perspective, but I want you to think about your students. Thinking about students who might have high interest, but students that might not have any understanding about engagement within STEM. Thinking about why is STEM an answer for students. Thinking about it from teachers. For the teachers that you lead, what connects them with it? Why STEM for teachers? And then think about your community. Parents, why STEM for them? So I want you to think about and put yourself in the shoes of each of those different audiences. Take about a couple minutes to jot down some of your own ideas, and I'd like you to talk with a partner at your table about why you see STEM from the student's perspective in your school or your district, from the teacher's perspectives, and from parents and community members. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to jot down some of your own ideas, and then I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk with the person next to you on why STEM from each of those perspectives. Okay? As you finish jotting down some of your own ideas, turn and talk to a partner, or if you have an odd number at your table, feel free to have a group of 3, but groups of 2 or 3. How would you respond to each of those? And start with the student, then teachers, and then community and parent member.
And they can apply their knowledge in different ways.
Opportunities for them to work together in teams. As far as a teacher's perspective, STEM integration allows teacher flexibility in instruction, so you get more vacuum when your team's reading STEM together. So presenting it as a whole fits
That is one
For parent and community, I will share that I was writing understand, but I didn't finish writing.
So, yeah, so what I wrote was job skills. It engages students in their community activities, like problem solving.
That's as far as
So when I say understand, I was going to write understanding.
We drank the Kool-Aid.
Yes.
I was writing understand how education has changed.
I don't say that. Oh, that sounds hard.
Better provides, I'm making this up as I say it now, better provides opportunities.
If your partner hasn't had a chance to share yet, shift to the partner. About a minute and a half here to finish up the conversations.
I like that you used full sentences. I did not. I just like made up the view. And I'm like, I hope that later when I look back at it, I'm not like, what was I telling you about? Why did I write that?
I think that's the only place that like we have to come back. But I got teacher's perspective, and like in all 3 of them, I wish I had thought more of the
Yeah.
and thinking about how this is for every student and how it's for every student.
Yeah.
Students should write a test Okay, so
Let's start to wrap up conversations. Okay. So, starting off from the student perspective, what were some of the things that, that you talked about in either your partner or you heard at your tables? I'll kind of run around with the microphone so you all can speak into it.
Oh, we all agreed that it's just more fun for students when you integrate STEM in the curriculum.
Okay. Great. Other thoughts?
For teachers, we were discussing how it creates more engaging teaching
I'm
practice.
going to bring the microphone just make sure that everyone can hear.
Oh, come on, I'm a principal.
I know, but
We were talking about, as a principal watching teachers, I notice when they are involved in STEM, there's more engaged teaching practices, and there's stronger pedagogy practices in place, because that comes naturally through the practices, the math and science practices that we'll be learning about. So I've really appreciated that about the STEM
okay.
world.
Fantastic. Other things from the student perspective here.
Oh, never
Yep.
mind, I was going by.
Let's stay with the student for another minute, another couple comments anyways here. So we had fun, we heard some higher engagement through the learning.
I think for me, it's relevance. It's the kind of learning they want to do.
Great. How about the teacher perspective?
So I was just thinking as a teacher, it allows me to build those relationships that get you further. Because the kids are engaged in something, they're doing something that they're enjoying and they're loving learning again. And so as a teacher, you're stepping back from that traditional, like she was saying, the traditional way of whole group instruction, and the kids are doing a small hands-on activity, and you can develop relationships with them that push them so much further in every other aspect.
Great. See hand up here. This is how I get my exercise for the day.
I was just saying that this is the learning that they've done since infancy, really. That's the learning that they do as toddlers. That's what makes it so fun. It's the same, it's how we learn.
Okay. Anything else from the teacher perspective? Yes.
There is no more isolation of content. We're able to go across discipline and to teach a whole content instead of just one step at a time.
Okay. Fantastic.
Hattie's effect size chart, like the meta-analysis of the things that are most impactful for student learning, is kind of topped by this idea of collective efficacy. And what an uncontrived opportunity to collaborate across classrooms like that STEM is. It's this opportunity to set up systems that require collaboration across teachers and teacher leaders.
Great, so bringing together the teachers and that collaboration.
I think another really important component of a teacher perspective is when you're thinking about equity. And I love how Kelly said that when you are incorporating STEM, that you're really providing opportunities for all students. And when we know our goals and we know where we want to go, we are able to provide engaging opportunities for students, but as we're monitoring and listening to the thoughts and processes of students, we also can make it more personalized in their learning and help them reach their goals and reach the goals of the lesson. And that's much more effective than showing a procedure of how something is to be done and making them fit into a box.
Great. One more, and then we'll go to the community.
I think from a teacher perspective at the same time, I know that this is how children naturally learn, but the world in which we currently live does not promote that very much anymore in an organic way. And so it is the school's opportunity to bring that necessary component into the classroom setting, where oftentimes in the middle of the last century, they would go home and practice these skills. That is not their life anymore, including in their preschool years. Our early teachers, kindergarten and preschool teachers are finding that children aren't coming to them with those kinds of experiences. So STEM and the STEM activities give us as teachers an opportunity to create that organic environment within the classroom so that they can learn as humans are designed to learn.
Great. How about as you think about from your community perspective or from parent perspective, how do you see STEM as the answer for your work?
Well, as a parent, I really like the critical thinking skills that STEM helps foster. And I want my kids to be able to think about things in a logical way, in a critical way, and not just believe something because they saw it on the internet.
Okay. Great.
Part of my job is to work with work-based learning, so I have the opportunity to go to the businesses and ask them, what do you want from our students, how they prepare for the field? And the common answer that I get from everybody is, we want students that can be problem solver. We don't want them to tell us everything that they know about that. We want them to be able to troubleshoot. We want them to be able to collaborate with others and to think of the problem and to be able to solve it. And if they cannot do that, it really is no good for us. That's what they tell us all the time.
Yep. Good. So the economic factors to it. Other ideas around community or parents?
I think that we can really offer an opportunity for parents to get connected back into the school through things like STEM nights and things like that. Opportunities for them to come in and say, you know, I'm a graphic designer and that's how that's related to STEM, or I own a granite countertop, you know, business and that's how that's related to STEM. I think that getting the parents back in the school and getting them connected with their student, you know, their child's learning is really important. I think a lot of parents feel disconnected, and getting them back in the school, you know, it's that positive kind of relationship that we can build through STEM.
Sure. Great. One more? Of course, other side of the room. Exactly.
We talked about building the capacity for community partnerships where students can actually solve real-world problems for the community.
Mm-hmm. Good, so the partnership piece there as well. So when we start setting visions, this I think is an important way to start the thinking. We oftentimes go right to the teacher perspective or our perspective as administrators. And the more that we can bring together multiple voices to really be thinking about what do we want this to look like in our community, how do we want to approach this, and what are we trying to accomplish is part of the work that we do as administrators. It's a challenge at times in terms of how to bring in engaging voices, to be able to have processes, to have opportunities to hear those. But one of the things we can always do as an administrator, and as a middle school principal, I did this consistently, is really trying to listen and to be putting myself in the mindsets of my constituents, my teachers, my students, my community members. And so this is a place that I think is really essential for us to start to think as leaders. What are the stakeholders looking at with this? And then thinking about what are those commonalities. Because if we can take all of these distinct voices, and in many cases these voices are not always in unison. They're competing in terms of how they want to approach this. We see from community that oftentimes that economic factor, that we want to have more students that are coming out with certain credentials for certain jobs, might not match necessarily other aspects of what we're seeing for the needs for students. And so being able to pull these together and look at those commonalities is part of the work that we're going to be doing. As we go through today, I want you to kind of be keeping your thoughts around the constituents that work with you. Thinking about the students, we'll actually having you engage in an activity today where you'll be engaging, and I want as adult learners, but really want you to think about it as a learner. We'll be processing that as educators and thinking about how does this really impact how we might be thinking about the work within our schools. And then consistently coming back to how does this really work within my community. I oftentimes joke when I'm speaking in Minnesota that we're the land of 10,000 STEM initiatives, to play off our 10,000 lakes. But it's really somewhat true that as we are looking throughout our state in Minnesota, we have some parts of our state that are very deep in agriculture, other part that's very deep in mining. We have a strong biomedical and medical in our Rochester and Twin Cities region. And so with that, there are some contexts, there are some ideas that are a little bit different. And then as we look at each individual school, there are community values that bring into that as well. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all, but it is something that we want to be thinking about. What are some of the commonalities? And also then, how does this look within my community, thinking about each of these stakeholders? As we take a look at what this looks like across the country. And I heard this as you went through your introductions today. Some introduce themselves as working within STEAM schools, some STEM schools. We have some schools that have identified themselves as STREAM schools, adding that reading aspect into it. We even have one school that I'm aware of that went with a hamster. Let's see, that's next slide here. A hamster acronym. At some point in time, it's called school, but that whole idea of integration is an important factor, but we want this to be just more than just a collection of miscellaneous topics or activities. And if it's just activity mania, where it is about a project that students are doing without really intentionality at what is our students learning, what are they engaging in, then we're missing some of the boat. And so don't get caught up in letters. It's not what STEM is. STEM is not the acronym. STEM is much deeper than that, and is part of what we want to start to move through before as we get into the vision. If it's just those letters on the outside of your school, those shingles can be hung out of any school, and they don't mean anything at all. It's what's happening inside that school. It is what is the vision behind why STEM for you that you want to get at. And so, as we take a look at STEM education, just some consistent messaging around that I think centers us is that it's more than just a focus on math and science. Yes, math and science have the two outside letters within that, but we know that the technology and engineering, the application is critical within that. But it's more than just engineering education. I have gone to a number of schools that they are doing different types of engineering projects. And they're really engaging, they might be a lot of fun, but the end outcome is nothing more than just a fun, active day. I have two kids. I have a son who's in 10th grade and a daughter who is in 7th grade. And when my son was in 4th grade, he was at a STEM school. And he came home one day and he was so excited. He said, "Dad, we're doing engineering today." And I said, "Oh, fantastic. What are you doing, Mikkel?" And he said, "Well, we built a bridge." I said, "Oh, great. What kind of bridge did you build?" "I don't know, it was a pasta bridge." "Okay, well, were you looking at forces in science? Were you thinking about the geometry from a mathematical perspective? Were you, what were you learning with it?" "Dad, I told you, we were building bridges, and it was fun." And, which, yes, that was an outcome of it, but the learning wasn't there. I asked him when he went on to middle school, I said, "Mikkel, as you reflect upon your elementary, what was the most enjoyable thing that you did?" And he talked about a number of different learning experiences. He talked about his environmental camp that he went to. He talked about his mathematics enrichment that he had. He talked about his working on the school newsletter. And I said, "Well, Mikkel, what about that bridge activity you did in 4th grade that you were so excited about?" This is where I know I'm talking too slowly. The slides go on behind me here. I said, "Well, what about that?" And he said, "What bridge activity?" I said, "Oh, you talked about the pasta bridge. It was a lot of fun." He's like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was fun. But I don't remember a lot about it." And I think that's one of the things that we get in a challenge as we take a look at the opportunities for engineering. It's a wonderful opportunity to engage students in deeper learning, but if STEM is just around that engineering, and we aren't able to really attach other concepts or learning behind it, oftentimes it's not that meaningful, deep learning that we want students to be engaged in. We also need to be aware that we aren't going to be necessarily able to teach all STEM concepts and skills. A lesson, yes, it'd be fantastic if we were able to hit upon the science, technology, the engineering, the mathematics, the arts, if it's something that we see, the literacy, whatever we're looking at integrating within the lesson. But it's important to understand the constraints of the system. And as we take a look at a lesson or a group of lessons, it's oftentimes about what are we intentionally focusing on. And it might be one day that we're focusing on the engineering and mathematics. Another day we might be focusing on the technology and mathematics. Another day we might be focusing on the science and the engineering. We might be looking at the science and the engineering and mathematics together. We might be bringing in an arts concept that we want to teach with it. But it's really thinking about what are we being intentional about. And if we're not intentional about all of those, is it still a valuable lesson? Is it still a integrated STEM opportunity? Yes. But we want to be really thinking about what are we trying to learn from that. We need to be aware that, and I'm talking too slowly again. So I think Ricky's moving the slides on me here. So, you know, one of the conversations that oftentimes have is really about thinking about how are these supporting each other. And this is going to be really important for your teachers in your schools. When I left my principal role, I took a job as a elementary curriculum integration coordinator, which was just a fancy title, which meant that I was brought in to start our elementary STEM magnet program within our largest district in Minnesota. I took it because I was excited about curriculum work. I was excited about still working with students, and I felt like I was missing some of those opportunities as a middle school principal, and I was able to really speak to where my heart was at around STEM concepts. And when I went into the role, one of the things that was very quick was the idea that this was supplanting learning that was happening that was in other content areas, as well as within the STEM disciplines. And there was an identity crisis for many of the teachers. And one of the things we really had to do is thinking about how are these pieces supporting each other. How do we help to connect teachers? You talked about this from the teacher perspective. It's an opportunity to really bring learning together. And thinking about how do we really keep focusing around support. This is supporting this part. It's not supplanting. We're not adding this additional engineering to the exclusion of science. We're not focusing on STEM to the exclusion of the arts, but really thinking about how are these connected. Integrating into the current, not adding on top of it. So really thinking about that as you start to approach this role through a curriculum, there's going to be something that is going to be missing. You're going to have to be thinking about how are you using this to really do the work smarter and do it more intentional and not necessarily just adding on and putting more things into the day, because at the end of the time you still have a finite amount of time in the classrooms each day. We need to be aware that this is connecting into other disciplines as well, and it's for all students. This is, I think this table up here, when Jolie brought up the idea of equity. If we're not thinking about how is this impacting all of our students, then we're missing the boat big time. And so thinking about our students with disabilities, thinking about it with our students who English might not be first language, thinking about how is this working with our special education students, our students that are struggling with dyslexia, thinking about how is this working with students who are in enrichment programs. It's for all students, and really bringing that interest and identity into the work. I also want to identify it's not a particular program and it's not a new idea. So this is something that we can trace back to John Dewey and talking about the idea of connected learning, integration. And so this is not something that's brand new. Yes, it's been packaged in this way of STEM. in the 1990s, when it first started to become kind of a slogan, it was SMET. Thankfully, they changed that to STEM. And so Judith Ramila, who was the head of NSF at that time, said, yeah, SMET, that's not going to really go real well. And so that they packaged it within STEM. But the idea of integration, the idea of authentic learning, again, we can trace back to John Dewey. And it's good teaching practices that are tied to that. You know, we talked, the idea came up in terms of how this fits into the community as well. As we take a look at how skills have changed since the 1960s, we see that a lot of the routine manual types of jobs that are out there, you know, they're still there, but those have somewhat dropped in the needs for jobs. As we take a look at the non-routine manual, we see that has decreased tremendously. And the routine cognitive, just being able to memorize facts. If you have that collection of facts in your mind, it's fantastic for work, but it's not necessarily something that's being looked at from an employment process. However, what's really interesting is these are the skills that are oftentimes easiest to teach, and oftentimes are part of our assessment. But they're what we're seeing that in industry, they're becoming automatized, and they're not engaging. They're not what the skills are looking for. They're not what they're trying to bring in workers around. Meanwhile, we see the non-routine analytic and the non-routine interactive, where we're working together and we're working with data. These are increasing consistently. And so the critical thinking, the problem solving, the being able to step into an uncertain environment and to be able to really understand is at the heart of a lot of what employability is looking for. And so a lot of the community, it falls into these data points that we know that our schools need to shift around, and they need to be thinking about how are we best supporting both where students are at, as well as where they're going with their careers. And so at this point, I like to really encourage taking and processing kind of this idea of STEM. And you've talked to at your table, you've gotten a little bit of an understanding from perspectives of the student, from the teacher, from the community member, centered around a few ideas around what is STEM and what is STEM not. Now thinking about how do you really communicate this? And we know that with all the information that's coming at people, the ways that we can communicate in a short snippet is oftentimes the strongest manner to do so. And so I want you to be thinking about the vision for your school, for your district. And I want you to put it into a bumper sticker type of idea. Now, why I say bumper sticker is, I'm not saying we actually put them on the back of cars here, but the idea. When you think about a bumper sticker, do you have a lot of time to read bumper stickers as you drive by? Not usually, right? You're going by really quickly, but do you catch bumper stickers sometimes and you see a bumper sticker and you smile, or you say, oh, I get that, or I understand that? You know, it's a quick reaction, but it needs to be a very purposeful idea. So where you're at right now, I want you to think about if you were going to say your vision for STEM in your community, in your school, in your district. What would your bumper sticker say? I'm going to give you a couple minutes, about 3 or 4 here, to talk at your table, reflect on some of the things that you've heard, and think about what would your bumper sticker say for your school. Okay? So turn and talk and share what your thoughts are for your bumper sticker for your school.
So what I thought of was a circular sticker that said STEM Revolution, because it is a cycle, so we're going around, but we're still making progress.
That's okay. Can you help with handing materials out? The next
Yes,
part?
I can.
Okay, you're on it next. I know if Ricky doesn't stay engaged, he gets in trouble, so.
I don't know that that's how it breaks down logically, but in my head, I like it that way.
I think Chad as well. And
It just can't be one of those things that you do.
girlfriend, you got a bumper sticker.
Well, interesting actually because we've been with our switch to DHA.
So you're doing the seeds first.
Yes.
So you want me to pass out seeds, dissection kits,
Yes.
and your little magnifying glasses?
Sure.
We need to reorganize tables though, should we? Because that table's
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we could give two, yeah.
Maybe
And they can
shoot it.
Yeah, and they can share hand lenses. I think I have 8 hand lenses.
Yeah, and I only have 10 dissection kits, so they can share those. But I think they have, you might want to give a warning that there are scalpels and sharp objects in those dissection kits. So like, be careful.
Yeah.
Don't hurt yourself. Do you want me to start doing it now or do you want to?
No, as I'll introduce the next thing and I'll have you come about. So you can always bring them over here just so it's ready to go.
Including the mathematics. The top of one of the curves is a little gear, so it's like our logo, but like smushed into like a single element. But I mean, it takes a while to get there. But we are. There were so many iterations. Yeah, we were like, we're not using yellow. They were like, you have yellow in our palette. Would you guys use yellow if it's this color? And we were like, no, it looks different. That's why it's not in our color. You know?
Oh, yeah. The yellow now.
Like in the survey?
Yeah, everyone. It's terrible. Yeah. No, I think I've been there too. Then there was
Am I hitting upon the right messages here?
I think it's perfect.
Okay.
There was a woman in the back, I was going to take a picture of you, and she's like, I wish I could just bottle them up and bring them to Utah. She's just saying everything my heart wants to hear.
Good.
Had I not pointed out to you.
All the ideas that I come up with, like, close rubber, because they feel like when I'm, it's just like 3 words. What can you say that doesn't? Education.
I had
I like that one better because it's cheesy enough to feel like authentic. Whereas
Like we
sounds
were
like you're trying to be cool.
And in Utah. I don't think that was the first thing that came to my mind. Having like parts of the background and saying so wrong.
That's funny to me because there is you guys looked at all of the D&E. So there, to charter school, we do a blended on-campus and digital instruction. It's a charter school. They're called
I've heard of them, but I've never worked with them.
Yeah, so all of their email addresses are it's always because they were like, well, we got to pick our own.
We'll start to come back together if you want to wrap up the conversation at your table.
You might as well.
Okay. Now I know that this feels a little bit cheesy, doing a bumper sticker, but part of this is really starting to think about and be able to respond quickly and efficiently in terms of what is STEM to you? What is this for your community? You can look at it as an elevator speech as well, as another way that I've seen this before. But the more that you as a leader can capture what your thoughts and vision are through the conversations, through the understandings of the community, the stronger you're going to have the programs that are going to start to emerge from that. And the sooner that you start to also really engage your community in the work. So I've seen this type of activity from our schools in Minnesota, that as they work through this process, which you'll be working through throughout these 5 sessions this year, you'll be working through with your community throughout this year as well. This becomes part of your identity. It becomes part of who you are. I see schools that are using them as their hashtags on Twitter to be able to share information. I see them using this as a way to engage community members when they come into the school. I see this as a way to be able to bring on new staff and onboard them into the culture that you're creating at your school. And really, when we talk about a lot of this work around STEM, it's really about defining the culture that you want to see within the walls of your district, of your schools. And so, while it feels cheesy, and I totally own that and totally understand that, this exercise, this idea is important to be able to really capture. And so, as we go through, I want you to continue to think back on this, to refine this idea of a vision that can be captured in a bumper sticker, or can be captured in an elevator speech, or whatever other type of quick snippet that might be able to capture that information. At the end, we're going to come back and I'm going to ask you to write a refined vision that that's clear, that's inclusive of where your thinking is now. Not final, because you'll continue to refine that this afternoon and over the course of the year, but continue to reflect upon this as you have each different experience leading into your thinking around STEM within your school. Now we're going to jump into actually giving you an opportunity to engage a little bit as a learner. And so I want you to be thinking about this as an adult learner, but I'm going to ask you to put that teacher hat away. And I'm not sure if those are the best hats or not, but I tried to make them a little bit different. So the top hat, a little bit more formal, put that aside. This is a tough thing for us as educators, because we always want to go back to saying, yeah, but what does this look like in my classroom? Yeah, and I'd like to be able to do this. If I was doing this, I would do it in this way. Absolutely. These are all important metacognitive reflection that we want to do. And we will do those, we'll come back to that after our activity. But in the meantime, since I know as students we have fun, we'll keep the sombrero on. And this will be our time to really focus in as learners. And thinking about this from the activity and how we're really engaging in the science, the technology, the engineering, and the mathematics. Some of these concepts I have embedded very intentionally in the lesson. Others I have referenced through the activity, so you'll have some experiences, but may not have as strong intentionality. Going back to a couple slides previous, that we can't necessarily do it all, especially when we're doing a 45-minute activity and not over the course of a week type of units. So thinking about that in terms of what am I learning, what am I engaging in, what does this feel like to me as a learner? And keep that top hat away, and we'll put that top hat on in about 45 minutes, and we'll do some metacognitive reflection on the activity that will be at hand. But we're going to be thinking a little bit today about the phenomena of why do some seeds survive and reproduce and some do not. So as you take a look here, we have some seeds in the picture. How might those seeds get placed in a place where they can reproduce? Turn and talk to the person next to you.
Well, I was looking at the little person seed. And there's like a lot that you can do to make sure that they have the emotional and physical support they need in their physical needs that are going to allow them to survive that very
The diaper.
Because you'll never do
But you always something really good to
He's a little,
yes.
Okay. By the way, I love the depth that you're having these conversations about this. In Minnesota, they go right to the diaper right away. I'm hearing the child is a seed. Absolutely, thinking about how that growing is there as well. So not just a plant, and I love that depth of thought within the picture. And that's one of the reasons why I put this picture here to kind of start the conversation, because when we take a look at seeds have a variety of different ways that they get transported into places where they can survive, and in different ways where they're going to be placed in places that they aren't able to survive. We're going to take a look at this from a perspective of seeds. At your table, my friend Mr. Scott is passing out a bag of different types of seeds, as well as a dissection kit. He wanted to remind you to know that there's a scalpel and sharp things in there, so please practice good safety. But I want you to explore the seeds that you have there in the bag. Take them out. Talk about them with others at your table, and think about, with each of the seeds, what on those seeds, what structure on those seeds will allow them to be able to be transported to reproduce? And what is the function of that structure? So going back to that watermelon, we know that watermelons are delicious. Well, I think they're delicious. So you eat them, and that's one of the ways the seeds get transported. Take a look at yours. Have one person record at your table. On a left-hand column, structures you see with the seeds. And on the right-hand column, what are the functions that enable that seed to be transported so that it is able to survive? Okay? Take about 5 minutes at your table. Feel free to use any of the tools. You have hand lenses, you have dissection kits. Feel free to use any tools that you would like to be able to dive into those. Oh, I had 8. That's the last one. Okay. That's okay.
7 and a pair of forceps.
So I had a bunch of stuff confiscated from my bag at the airport.
Oh no.
Apparently they don't like when you bring scissors, dissection stuff.
Supposedly that's a problem.
We have scissors.
Yeah, we picked up a bunch, and same thing with the dissection
Like
kits.
6:30 at the office
So-
and like rated everything we needed. We're like,
Somehow TSA does not know their STEM teachers that travel.
I don't know, rocket fuels, they have a special pass they get to carry around that allows them to take things.
True.
We need one for science teachers.
I think so. Work on that.
I'm on.
I've not noticed any rock cell.
No, it's just the pod opens and there's tons and tons of
So this is a-
Oh, you guys are okay. Oh, you get the seat off. So each of these little like parachutes has a seat on it.
Ah!
Because you people don't
That was really those two things were really
My sister was out getting Oh, these
I think all
They're kind of fun seeds.
They kept flying all over the tree.
Yeah, just gather. We have squirrels. The squirrels will redistribute.
It's just like a berry.
Yeah.
It's a berry.
Isn't that awesome? Husband really make like a little
You're taking home a whole collection.
If you could plant your sweater and
It's definitely got some aerodynamics at play. That's in here, but it gives it.
So what's the purpose of this?
We're allowed to cut these open, right?
Yes, I would expect that.
Are any of these invasive species that we should be worried about?
Absolutely.
Invasive to Utah.
Mostly invasive, though, was confiscated from me at the airport, so. But we're going to take all the seeds and drop them down in Harriman in Ricky's backyard, so.
We are.
It is pretty brutal, so.
I love it. We're all trying to get rid of it. She's just like embracing it. She's like,
It's so fun.
So I wonder if it's, is this from a tree that only grows in the west? Because I don't, like, this is not part of my job. These are.
It's like a balloon in a football
This one.
But this is equal to.
And this could fly. Oh wait, I said fly. It could get caught in your hair.
So yeah, this becomes like very valuable.
Attached to animals.
When you finish up, do you want to bring this garbage around and just kind of pick up all the seeds?
Oh, should I toss them out?
Well, yeah, because people have detected them pretty good.
Yeah, they have. How does that taste?
We could just.
I just want to go over there and sneeze. I'm gonna sneeze right on Chris. I want to try this.
It's getting more out. It's getting more out. I just love it. At the end, Ricky,
Oh, but it's
I've been
Try to identify as many structures as you can identify and what their function is to allow for survival through transport. Another couple minutes just kind of to finish with documentation.
Oh, yeah.
Should I give them a break in between activities here?
Exactly.
If there's like what we do a lot of times is during an activity, we say like do this and like you can take a break.
So I'll remind them as we get moving to the next part of this, just if you need to take a break, take a break. Take care of yourselves. Okay, perfect.
Whereas perhaps
Start to finish up the conversations here. Finish the documentation. I'll give you about a minute here. Okay, let's come back together here. Thank you, by the way, for reminding each other of sombreros. I heard this back table use that several times to stay in the moment as students, and that's fantastic. And by all of the milkweed seed that I see flying around the room, I know you have kind of been engaged in this as students, and that's fantastic. So as you've been taking a look at these, think about what are some of the structures and what's their function around around transportation for it to be able to be able to reproduce. So, coconut. So some of these are ones you have in your packet. Some of these are not. What is a structure, and how does it function for that coconut to reproduce? Okay, hard outer shell. So what does a hard outer shell do? It protects it, so it is able to fall to the ground without breaking open and distributing right there. How about its shape? It rolls, it's round, or somewhat, so it's able to then be carried away.
Does it float?
Float, okay, possibly. Taste.
Comes with its own water source inside.
Comes with its own water source inside. Taste, perhaps. Okay. How about dandelion? Travels through air. It's light. Travels far, very light, able to get in the wind and carry. I'm sorry?
They're sticky.
They're very sticky, yes. Okay. Sandbur. I think some of you had that in your packet.
Barb.
It's barb.
To a animal fur.
Okay.
Or us, we could transport it on our clothing.
Sure, so it's barb, so it's able to be transported by animals, including humans. I know my dog oftentimes brings those in the house. Acorn. By the way, I have to say, I went out to collect a few more seeds with Ricky. He had to make sure all of the acorns still had the caps on there. So if you appreciate caps on acorns, that's Ricky. I was I was just picking up acorns, and he said, no, we have to get cap ones. How about how about acorns? What are the structures on the acorn?
Heavy enough.
Okay, heavy enough that has mass, so it's able to drop there. It's a food source.
Pretty thin shell that's accessible by animals.
Yep, thin shell, so it's accessible by animals, so it can be digested or opened up. How about, oh, go ahead.
Oh, it has several layers.
Yeah.
So then it keeps them coming back for more.
Perfect, yeah, several layers, so it keeps coming back for more. How about apples? Okay, taste. Protected flesh.
Attractive color and smell.
Attractive color and smell.
Well, the seeds are encapsulated so that if the apple falls to the ground and starts to decompose, we've got a great food source for the seed to be able to grow.
Fantastic, yeah, so it has a food source around the outside, so as it falls and decomposes, it's able to have that extra nutrients there. Pine cone, some of you had that in yours? What's the structure in a pine cone? Closed.
It opens to release the seeds.
Opens to release the seeds. What do you need for it to open? Heat. So when you have a wildfire, it's one of the first things to reproduce. Okay. Maple seed. How does that, what structures on that and how does it function? Okay, so it functions through a twirl. So what's the structure that makes it twirl? Okay, the shape, got that little piece there that allows it to catch wind. How about the end of it?
Yeah, the weight brings it so
seed down.
Okay, so the weights has a seed there, so it lands seed down on there. It's able to then transport. You had some different sizes of maple seeds in your kits there. Did anyone take a look and see how they operate in different ways? Well, Ricky is over here right now. Well, that's what we're going to explore. We're going to explore the motion and the tendencies of a maple seed. And so, Ricky, do you want to hand out the template? I'm going to hand out a whirligig template, which operates in the same type of motion as the maple seed. And I'd like you to explore with that a little bit. You'll see that it has dotted lines for folding and bold lines for cutting. As you create it, you'll have a paper clip as well. And I want you just to experiment with it, play with it. Identify what are some things that might affect how long it takes for it to land on the ground. So thinking about at your table, what might be some things you could do to it to either cause it to fall to the ground quicker or for it to be delayed to fall. And thinking about which ones might we be able to come back and test. Okay? I'm going to give you about 10 minutes here for exploration, for play. Remind you that if you need to stand and stretch, need to have a biology break, feel free to do so while we are engaged in the activity. Take care of yourself as learners. So if you do need to move, please do so. Probably best to work in teams, so in either pairs or trios at your table. We'll bring around scissors and templates for you to explore with. Okay? And again, about 10 minutes, explore what causes the whirligig to fall to the ground and how might you affect the rate at which it falls to the ground. Okay.
One other idea is there are snacks on this table. Those are for you. Please feel free to partake at any point.
Snacks for eating, not for the whirligig though, right? Okay, we can put on the whirligigs then too. Transport food. So 10 minutes here for exploration on what factors affect the duration that the seed falls to the ground.
All right. Always go back. I have a
Do you have hand of the rulers too?
What?
Rulers?
Yeah, they're on the table. So we weren't sure if you wanted to like extend it to that. Are we just like doing it like? Are we
Well, they're
using
looking at
this
they're looking at the factors right now. So if they want to look at the
Okay, good,
rulers, I think that's okay. None of the other, so give them each of them should have a paper clip. Let's be consistent with just the same paper clips for everybody. So these, and then let's give them a ruler. So.
Would you like these tools just to be on the table so that they can choose what tools to use?
So these, yes, these are going to be for the
Later?
For later, and so they're going to be doing the.
But what about just?
That'll be for later as well.
Okay, so
Yeah, so they'll look at different mass, or they'll look at different ratios of size that they'll experiment with later. So.
Okay.
So that's what all this is for the engineering part, and that's where we'll bring the math in.
Waiting, and I was starting to talk about the different things in the proportional relationships that.
Yep.
But okay.
So with the experiment that they'll be doing, once we get into a controlled experiment, that's what we'll talk about, some of that, and bring some of that language into it. So being stealth.
Certainly seem to have done you in the same direction, and mine are opposite. Here, so.
Feel free to use any of the tools being passed out to you. So if you like to use the rulers for any measurement, there is a paper clip to be able to emulate the seed in the maple seed.
I wonder if I turned these the other way, so they weren't in the opposite direction of your I'm wondering what that
Look at how her sleeves are.
It's funny to watch grown adults throw paper so excited into the air.
Not only that, these are all adults with advanced degrees as administrators.
We need some pictures of this.
I was watching that.
Now, Melissa, you guys have insurance if anyone falls from the table, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
They're up there.
They get into it, that's great.
They are engaged.
And so what if I got rid of, here's the price of all, but I kept my foot folded up? Shall we compare our two now?
Let us experiment. I'm sure this is not.
Is that the objective here is to slow down?
Oh, I asked Melissa. She said we have insurance, so.
They're not angled, they just sort of rolls down, but if you bend them, it goes straight down and then it just spins.
So if you have paper, let's modify that.
Okay, so my question is, what's standard is the
Oh, I see.
That's better, but let's tie it.
Let's both them together.
Yeah.
It turns over.
How many do you have
Now what happens when you have three?
Okay, this one goes more.
You're not supposed to bend those. What if you cut it? Michelle says nice as well.
About 4 more minutes for test. 4 more minutes for testing.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're speaking to my heart.
Oh, good. It's in my heart too, so.
Oh, goodness. I was so blessed to get this job when I retired. I thought, oh my gosh, I get to do this, and they're just rolling out their science.
Oh, that's amazing to do that. Yeah.
But I'm with you. You see so many people that say, oh yeah, I teach STEM.
Right.
And it's activities, but there's no learning.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so what can we do to make this so it's a learning experience, right?
Right, exactly. And make it unique and make it impactful for the work.
It's a good way to start.
Absolutely.
Then they get excited, but
right.
Now how are we going to make it meaningful?
That's what's going on right now. This is the exploration, it's play, and then we'll come back and we'll actually bring the learning into it. So yeah, so there's a place for it, but
There
just
is.
scaffolding it then.
Really like when I said, even we're perplexed. Because if I flip it like this, it doesn't work. Oh, wait a second. It was not.
So what direction is it spilling?
This way, it was fine.
What direction is it spinning when it does that?
No, it's not cooperating. You know when they show the teacher?
Right.
Never mind, it's not. Or when you go to the doctor because you're sick and they can't find anything wrong.
Right, exactly. Then you come back 2 weeks later for another one.
Okay, kind of see what I was talking about.
So it certainly works one way a little bit better.
So that was.
I'd also encourage you to take a look at and see what ways does it spin, depending on clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on how you have it too. Minute here and we'll come back together as a group. And I'll be asking you about what things affect the duration of its spin.
Duration. Well, I think
Maybe because it increases the surface area of the blade.
yeah, this is that.
You're not getting back.
I know.
I stayed in bushes.
Okay, let's come back together as a large group. So you've had a chance now to play with the template around a maple seed. So it operates in a very similar way. It spins, and that spin affects the time it takes for it to come to the ground. So as you were exploring with that, as you were playing around and identifying the different parts that might affect that, what were some of those things that were affecting the time it was in the air, the spinning that it was doing?
The weight.
Okay. Tell me more. The weight, what about the weight?
How many paper clips you had on?
Okay, so the number of paper clips that you had onto it.
Seemed to make it spin faster and stay in the air longer.
Okay, well, we'll come back and we'll kind of put some explanations around it here. But right now, just think about what are the things that are affecting it. So the amount of paper clips that you have put onto the seed.
I split the rotors.
Ah, so cutting the rotors, so adding additional rotors by cutting them from 1 to 2, or 2 to 4, I guess, right? Mm-hmm.
The length of the foot.
The length, okay, of the foot of it, okay? So how long the foot of the seed was?
And the length of the rotors, we cut some.
Okay, the length of the rotors?
Direction they're folded.
Direction they're folded?
The width, like I left them wide, so surface area of the rotor?
Surface area of the rotor, okay, so the width of that.
How you folded them?
Okay, tell me more about how you folded them.
Oh, I just did different ways of folding them instead of flat. So it made a difference.
Okay, so rather than having that straight fold, folding in different angles there, okay? Yes?
What was interesting is I tried to mimic the shape of the actual seed.
Mm-hmm.
Failed.
Okay.
So there's something more there that I can't put my finger on about the shape of the wing.
Sure.
But it didn't work in this experiment.
Okay, so there's something to the shape of the wing that affects the spin of it and the action of that. Anything else that you found that affected it? Well, let's talk a little bit more and find out what actually is occurring here. Okay, and so we're going to be thinking about an experiment that you're going to conduct at your table or with your partner on the seed. Okay? Thinking about those different pieces that affect the seed. And we had about 8 or 9 different things that you just shared. An example might be what effect a longer stem has on the seed. At your table or as a partner, identify one variable that you would like to test and conduct a fair test on to identify how it impacts that. Okay, so it might be the width of the blade. It might be the length of the stem or the foot. Okay, identify one variable that you and your partner or your table would like to experiment on. Take 30 seconds to navigate that.
What do we want?
One factor.
If your partner really does not want to test the same thing you're testing, you can always trade partners with a different table. I'm just trying to mediate some discussions right now.
We could have each other.
Once you have a variable that you have identified that you're going to be testing, look at me and give me a thumbs up. So once you've identified the variable, look at me and give a thumbs up. This is usually where I'll take a picture of a group so that I can say, I was doing a good job, everybody gave me a thumbs up. But perfect. So with that variable, you're going to do 2 things right now. First of all, with your partner, I want you to identify a hypothesis. That hypothesis I'd like you to write as an if-then statement. So if we double the size of the foot, then the time will double, or will half, or whatever it might be. Second thing that I want you to do is think about an experimental model. Okay? With that, I want you to be very intentional about two things. First of all, keeping all variables even to the template, with the exception of what you are testing. And second, attend to precision. So think about if you are looking at, for example, the length of the stem. Identify what the different ratios will be, what the different proportions will be, how you're going to develop your experiment to be able to see the effect of whatever it is that you're looking at. If you are looking at the fold, what angle are you going to be folding at? Okay? You have rulers at your table, so you're able to attend to that precision, but this is really important that as you are conducting this investigation, that to have what we call fair test, that we are very consistent with the measurements. So two things right now. Identify a hypothesis written as an if-then statement. If we do this, then this is going to happen. And identify the process by which you are going to experiment, thinking about precision, thinking about the measurement that is going to be brought into the investigation you're going to be exploring. Okay? What questions do you have with those directions? Yes?
Do you want time to be involved in the hypothesis? Necessarily?
It doesn't. The question is, do I want to have time involved with the hypothesis? It does not necessarily have to be in the hypothesis. The conclusion, you'll have that as part of your conclusion later on. If you'd like to include it in your hypothesis, you may put it in your hypothesis, but you do not have to have time in your hypothesis right now, precise time. Okay? What other questions do you have? Okay? Take 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I'll give you 3 minutes here because I'm feeling kind right now. Take 3 minutes for hypothesis and your procedure.
Yeah. So we're going to try it.
We will get a chance to do the investigation shortly, so this is not time to investigate. Just with what you have explored right now, your hypothesis and your process.
I'll stop.
Oh, I checked the paper. Did you already take it? I did.
Go. All right.
I'm not good.
So we're just focused on the second and third one right now. We are not yet going down to the experiment, just forming a hypothesis and our experimental model. Another minute to finish up your hypothesis and your experimental model.
2.05. Yeah. And ready, go.
Okay. Can I have eyes back up here? We'll get a chance to experiment here shortly. This is when I know the sombrero is still on. You will get a chance to experiment. I promise you. Man of my word, you'll get some time to experiment here. Okay. Now, One of the things that I will do with my students on this in many cases, and even when I do this in a PD setting, I'll oftentimes do what's called a variable sort, that we will identify that we have different variables at each of the tables, so that we are collectively kind of putting in ideas and ensuring that we have as many different variables that we're able to test throughout the room. Just for time's sake, we're not going to go around and make sure everyone has a separate variable they're testing, but this is something that is a way to really look at equity within the classroom as well, to ensure that with that, everyone has something that they're contributing to the class and that they're adding to the class results. Sometimes I might put 2 on a variable to ensure that we have consistency, but a variable sort is a tool that could be used here. As you conduct your experiment, I do want to have you engage in discourse, and I want you to have discussions, thinking specifically about what you are observing and what you are measuring. So as you conduct your experiment, I will ask that you time it. So I don't have stopwatches, but I stopped bringing stopwatches when I found out that all cell phones have stopwatches on them now. So if you use those, I do want you to time it, but also pay close attention to all measurements as you go about this as well. And so really thinking about, are you being precise with those measurements, and are you being precise with the timing? As you do that, I'd like you to use these talk stems here to engage in conversation. So to understand what someone is saying, you might say, I hear you say, and then you rephrase what you're hearing from them. Oftentimes this is a good way to get clarification, to see that you're understanding the same thing that they're trying to tell you. I agree with your idea because I notice, and I would be precise about that. I agree that as we have increased the length of the stem by 2 centimeters, then, so I agree with your idea, being precise with the idea, because I notice and what you're seeing with that. So you might have 2 people timing, and you might say, you know, I agree that as we added the 2 centimeters, that the time was an additional, or was less than whatever. I disagree with your idea. Can you explain what you mean by? This one I think is really helpful as you're trying to think about what's happening. What is about this maple seed that's occurring? What might be about the proportionality that you need to be able to support and understand? So could you explain what you mean by? I think because, okay? Constantly going back to that evidence tied to the claims tied to that evidence. And then I can add to that by. Okay? So in your conversations, in your experiment, as you record your data, I would like to have each of you, and this is where it gets to be really kind of uncomfortable, I'd like to have each of you use at least 2 of those stems in your conversation. And it does feel sometimes like it's a little bit unnatural, but it will help to really bring your group to the final conclusion as we finish up. So as you that, each of you are required to use those in the conversation and hold each other accountable for that. Say, can you rephrase that using one of those sentence stems? I am going to give you another 10 minutes here for your investigation. Okay, so you might want to have a timekeeper with it as well. Create a table that you're able to record your data. Use these sentence structures to be able to have discourse about what you are measuring or what you are observing with this investigation. What questions do you have? By the way, that's one of the things I always try to bring in is, rather than saying, do you have questions, and just assuming that there's not questions, asking what questions do you have, and assuming that I was not very clear and that there's going to be some questions there. So it's something that I found that oftentimes has encouraged kids to be able to ask questions as well. But since I see that even with my rambling, there's no more questions and that there's fully clear, I'll give you 10 minutes here to engage in your investigation. Again, be very precise with your measurements and with your timing here. Okay? I know you were. Okay, 10 minutes, go ahead.
Since I'm the tallest, hold it and drop it. Okay, I can record it.
We should be able to do really, because we could not cut them until after we've done what we can do, and then we could cut
My phone has a slow motion camera on it.
Unless you got your iPhone out and slow
From here to here, but here 4 times.
Just over.
What was the last one?
Ready, set, go. 7, 3, 7.5. Ready,
Yeah, I thought it would be 4. Yes.
Are you counting grade time? 1 Ready, set, go. Yeah. That my delay is half a second from when you say it, or a second.
We're somewhere in the 2 to 3 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
Be sure to use your sentence structures here as you're able to.
Second one that hit your body and it fell off your face. You might redo the second of the no way just because it was.
Okay, so your arm is like straight out. I like this. like the idea of the seed as a phenomena, like
6 rotations, no paper clips.
and then what got our attention, and then
No significant difference.
I'm not ready. Okay, ready?
Three minutes left in investigation.
Let's do another one just as another. Can we do one more? Let's do one more with
So it's like, it did like 7, it did not up to
Yeah.
oh no. I have to read about 1.85.
Ready? 1.5.
But we're seeing it.
Wow. That's slower. It was a lot of spin. What made that? Were you laughing or feeling air?
So I guess we are like, one of the things I agree with you say that, I agree with your idea.
So an ANOVA could be
They have the background knowledge
About a minute and a half here to finish the investigation. Okay, finish up your data collection and head back to your spots. No. No, but we otherwise, Jolie, we'd have to go into lunch and. Okay.
We've got all these snacks.
True. Okay. Now, if you still have a few data pieces to collect, that's okay. I'll give you, you can finish up a couple data collections while you're working on your explanation. But as you are finishing your data collection, I'd like you to take a look at your data. And I want you to analyze that and think about going back to your hypothesis. Thinking about if then. If I add length onto my stem, then the time is whatever it might be, okay? Develop a conclusion from the results written in that format. You must utilize your data in your conclusion statement. So with that, you are including any measurements that you made while you were altering the variable and your time that it took to drop. Okay? So I'm going to give 4 minutes. Since Julie asked for 4 minutes, I'll give 4 minutes here to finish the last couple trials if you have that, to put your data into a data form, and then to create your explanation. Again, using an if-then statement and utilizing data from the measurement and from the time that you conducted the experiment with. Okay? So 4 minutes to work on your explanation.
It's not even.
Trial and error.
I think we got it right? Yeah.
3, 2, 1.
So you can't do.
We like our data.
It made it mathematically better fit for ANOVA.
Even numbers, but they're divided equally.
So odd numbers didn't work as well. What about that?
No, you didn't get any twirling with the even numbers. You got twirling with the even numbers.
Except we didn't get that one.
Well, and then but if instead of 6 after 4, they were centrally around the table, would that have changed?
I don't know where you put it off at the elementary level. And then it gives them a simple structure to be able to make sense.
I think it does.
Start to finish up. We're going to have you share out your results here momentarily. About a minute here to finish up.
All right, go.
Our big picture is I started this stuff like
Okay, finishing up the conclusion here. About 30 seconds and we'll share back with the group.
And time.
Okay, so I want to hear from each of the groups here on what you tested and what your results were. And this is going to play into supporting our next challenge here. So does every group have their conclusion finished? Can I get a thumbs up if you have your conclusion finished? 1 second. 1 second.
We're the slower group.
Okay, so if one group needs to finish up here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start over here, and we're going to pass the microphone around. I'd like you to share with the group what it was that you investigated and what your conclusion was. Okay?
Do we have data?
We do.
Thanks.
You're up.
First.
Just for your friend.
Comparing if the blades of the whirling gate changed with a circle rotor on top compared to a square rotor on top, we found no significant difference. The p-value was 0.0585. We found that as we did 10 tests, give me the averages. The average of these blades. The circle, was averaged, where is it? Oh, there they are. The mean of the circle on top was 2.451, where the mean of the square on top was 2.028, plus or minus 0.036. Our standard error was
Plus or minus 0.0.
It's our standard deviation divided by the square root of our sample size, which was 10.
Okay, great. Next group.
We investigated the width of the rotor. So we had 3 trials, one with a rotor width of 1 centimeter, a rotor width of 3 centimeters, and a rotor width of 7 centimeters. The rotor width of 1 centimeter fell at, it took 1.03 seconds to fall. The 3 centimeters was 1.166 seconds to fall. And the wider one at 7 centimeters was 1.35. So the wider the rotor, the longer it took to fall.
Great. Thank you. Next group. Everybody's pointing to you.
We investigated the weight of the seed as compared to both the spin rate and the time from drop to hitting the ground. Our initial analysis is that the spin rate increases with the increase in weight of the seed, with an R value of 0.47642, with a confidence interval that's not very high. Our time to the ground seemed to decrease, and it does not appear to be linear, but we haven't done a regression yet, so we don't know what the shape of that curve is. We're working on it.
Perfect. I'll have to remember next time to give enough time for people to do a PhD as well. Next group here.
We experimented with or investigated the weight that we put on that foot. So we started with no weight, and it took an average of 2.37 seconds, or 2 and 37 seconds. Sorry, there's so many scientists in here, I should say it right. 2 and 3,700 seconds. Then we doubled the weight. It was 2 small paper clips, and it was half a second faster on average. Then we doubled the weight again to 4 small paper clips, and it was 3/4 of a second faster. And then we did 4 small paper clips plus that little mini elephant clip. And it was almost just under 1 second faster, but still not half the time. So.
Great.
From a height of, what was it? 7.5 feet.
Exactly.
Give or take a foot.
Yeah, exactly.
Give or take a foot, okay. Next group.
Yeah. We actually had some questions from that last group because it was a similar experiment. So we tested weight, the effective weight on the drop time of our whirligig, and our experiment, our independent variable we used, or explanatory variable was that we did no weight on the first one clip, and then 2 clips, and then 4, 8, and 16. We didn't get to 32, although that was proposed. Our null hypothesis, or our starting point, was that there'd be no difference with drop time with weight, but our alternative was that we thought actually that it would initially slow down because of increased rotations, but then it would drop faster because of the added weight. And we found that, we would reject that null hypothesis and accept our alternative, and say that 1 paperclip was a slower drop time for us by about 0.5 of a second on average. But once we added 2 paper clips, it dropped roughly the same rate as with no weight, and then 4 paper clips, it was a 0.5 or a 0.5 of a second faster, and then 8 was 0.7 faster than that, and then again 0.6 on average faster with 16 paper clips. So it worked as we thought, but actually, looking back at it, we were surprised how quickly it only went at 2 paper clips. There was no difference with fall time versus no weight added. So that was a surprise to us.
Great. Thank you. And now, just kind of before we have the last 3 groups, our next step we're going to be jumping into is you're going to be engineering a seed that you can identify, you can change any of the variables around, and so really thinking about what's the optimal type of seed. So as you're listening, hopefully you're getting some ideas. If there's conflicting evidence, then there might be some more things that you'll investigate as you get into this. But as you're listening, thinking about optimal based upon the different variables here. So we'll go to the next group here.
So we experimented with the length of the rotor, and we had 6 different trials, starting with a full-length rotor on down to just a 1 centimeter rotor. We dropped it from the approximate same height every time, and did multiple trials and averaged them. And what we found is that a rotor with a length of 7 centimeters actually took the longest time to make it to the ground with 1.71 seconds. With a full-length rotor, our average was a 1.28 seconds, and with just a 1 centimeter rotor, it was 0.53 seconds. So it surprised us that a shorter length did actually increase the time of travel, but as you continue to shorten it, then it did make it a faster travel time, which is what we had hypothesized.
Yeah.
How much difference was there between full length and
Our full length was 1.28 seconds, and our 1 centimeter length was 0.53 seconds.
compared?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Next group here. I saw them all putting their fingers to the nose. Who got the last finger on the nose? Okay.
So our hypothesis was that if we increase the number of wings, then it would fall slower. So we had, we went from 1 wing to 2, 3, and 4. The average time for 1 wing to fall was 79 hundredths of a second. 2 wings, the average was 1.5 seconds. 3 wings was 1 5 hundredths of a second, and 4 wings was 1 15 hundredths of a second. So our conclusion was, when using a single plane with wings folded in alternate directions, having an even number of wings increase the fall time. versus having more wings that did not slow the fall time. And we found that nature is right, 2 wings were the most effective design related.
And we want to say our definition comes with our sombrero hat, not our teacher hat.
That's good. Okay. Have you guys done the nose thing yet?
Yeah, I did. I started. It's over here.
Over here? Okay.
There we go.
So we did the same as that table did over there as far as the rotor length, and our data looks really similar to yours. So we started at 11 centimeters, and the time was at 1.42 seconds to land, and the maximum time was at 7 centimeters for 2 seconds. And so it's as the length is increasing, as the length is decreasing on the rotor, the time is increasing until you get to 5 centimeters, and then it sharply decreases.
And we added the rotations. So then we also measured rotations and how many rotations, and then it had like a rotational change right at that sweet spot as well.
We also speculate that the length of the wing compared to the size of the stem is relational.
Okay.
Not sure yet, but there's something going on there.
Friends.
So that's a fantastic thing, is it continues to add more questions that we can investigate. And truly, if we spent more time, we might dive a little bit deeper into some of these variables, and might take a look and ensure that the data is accurate, and we start to create some meanings that bring all these pieces together. I feel like I'm in one of those TV baking shows, because we're going to skip past that and go to the oven and pull things out of the oven here, and that's the engineering. And so you've heard now the investigation, and we have a number of tests that have been conducted that have taken a look at several different variables. You are now going to be thinking about all those variables to create the optimal seed. So commenting when I was walking over with Ricky this morning, that as we took a look at maple trees, some of the maple trees had really small seeds. Some had really large. We had some medium ones. We had some that had just one side of a propeller. Some had 2 sides. So there's a lot of variability within nature. And if we were going to look and see which one has the best likelihood for passing its traits on to its offspring, we want to be able to in this case, we're going to say that we want it to travel to the ground as slowly as possible, which will allow the wind to pick it up and to be able to carry it the furthest away from its host tree, which would give it the likely, we're going to make the hypothesis it will have a likely chance for survival. So you're going to be creating a maple seed using this whirligig idea that will travel to the ground as slowly as possible. Your constraints is you must have at least 1 paper clip. You may use more paper clips if you like. The next constraint is actually not going to be a constraint anymore, because thanks to Ricky, we rated the Utah Office of Education this morning, and we have all different types of paper over here. We have some large paper. We have this is the largest size paper. We have some medium-sized paper. We have the template-sized paper, so you may choose any type, any size you would like to have. However, you must include 2 wings and a stem, so that it was able to travel like a maple seed for that. Okay? So the 2 constraints are the wings and stem and the paper clips. Otherwise, you may choose anything that you feel would be able to create that in an optimal way. And optimal, we're saying, is traveling to the ground as slowly as possible. Okay? I'm going to give you 10 minutes to explore and investigate. You may use any materials on that front table. I suppose you could use any food too, but certainly any up there. There's different types of paper clips, different sizes. There's the binder clips. There's different size paper. There's different texture and density of paper. So you may choose any of those that you'd like to explore with right now as you engineer the optimal maple seed. Okay? You will have 10 minutes. So One of the things that I oftentimes recommend when we have shortened amount of time is sometimes having smaller groups allow for a little more flexibility to do that. So I would encourage you to have groups of 2 or 3 rather than groups of 6 or 8. Bless you. To conduct this investigation. Okay. What questions do you have? Okay. So 1 paperclip at least must have wings and stem. Optimal maple seed that's going to travel to the ground as slowly as possible. You have 10 minutes. You can get started.
Yeah, wait.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple, but they said 2 is best, right? Yeah, they said 2. They said nature, their conclusion was nature did the best with 2.
Meaning, I think just this.
Just the basic rotor.
Okay, so let's cut this one longer.
Wait again.
Do it. Right.
Get that.
This is where the right is.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. Yes, thank you. So instead of having the paper clip at the bottom, we can put it right in it.
Put it right there.
Okay, and Elizabeth brought another point.
How many paper clips? You want the bigger paper clip?
Well, let's just take this one and see what
But again, so the one I was reading was the paired test. They gave me both paired and I'm sorry, the paired was a 0.6. So it's just above significant, just below significant. And the other one was
now we're trying
So there's 2 ideas to draw. This is a great idea. Is that his competitive nature to try to win?
I will make no comment.
I don't know. The nonverbals make plenty of comments.
I have learned my job is political, and I am not making a comment on
Well, no, we can't.
No, I said it must include at least 2 wings.
She found that 2 was the most
Yep.
effective.
So yeah, if you want to have 20,000 wings, you can do that.
Wider blade.
Yeah.
So 2 wings. They already figured that out.
Let's try these.
Are we going to trans
So we're a little bit behind on time. Can we go into lunch a little bit? Okay. Probably won't need more than 10 minutes or so.
Okay,
Just
that-
10 or
that's
15
totally
minutes.
The lunch setup is buffet.
Okay.
Sometimes we have boxes, but because we knew there was going to be some like variance in who had registered and whatever, we ended up doing buffet. So we have a little bit of wiggle room. If we had boxes, it's like we can go 45 minutes.
Right.
But 10 is great.
Yeah, 10 or 15. I'll be hard on stop time of this just so we can get into it.
I like it.
So
yeah, it's been super great.
Well, there's some work involved in
I know time goes by fast. There's about 3 more minutes in a 10-minute constraint.
And then the number of rows too.
We have 2 minutes to finish up our design.
We do our original.
I kind of noticed that as it was getting down here, it slowed down and was. So I'm wondering if it was higher, if that would help out a lot.
Oh, a little bit more.
Well, I'm wondering about it. I don't know.
Why can't we throw it? But I doesn't really have
No. We'll do that. There's always a stage here too.
Oh, with the chair on the stage. Oh,
Okay, so it's a late spin.
Right, now, what you want to do now? How about the chair on the stage?
Need to dig a hole to drop it into.
Air resistance, right?
Okay, get your final test in here. Tough luck, Ricky. You had your time constraint. If you don't follow your time constraint, it's your issue. Okay, finish up your last test and then we'll come back together as a group here. If you'd like to keep exploring during lunch, I'm sure that's a possibility. But I want to get you to lunch, so. So do your last test and then come back together as a group here.
We're just finding out ways that don't work, you know?
Okay, let's come back together as a group here. And I know that constraint of time is difficult, but what I want you to experience was the process, not necessarily the final product. So we're now going to jump back into teacher hat here. And so kind of think about this learning opportunity and how it engaged us. Okay? So I want you to think about 4 different questions. How were the science concepts or skills used in designing the solution? How might one of the designs be used in another setting or purpose? So the technology behind it. How were the criteria, trade-offs, optimization, or any other engineering terms that you used were involved in that design process? And what mathematical concepts or skills were used as we went through that process? And as I think about talking about that, that's really from our very first play with the whirligigs to your final engineering design. Okay, so each of those, you can talk about each of those 4 together in conversation. But at your table, take 3 or 4 minutes here just to identify what you saw as the science, math, engineering, and technology concepts and skills that were embedded in the lesson. Okay? Turn and talk at your table.
Ratios,
Identifying patterns.
And one of those discussions
Yeah, we measured that.
on the first floor of the hall. You're going to go there too.
This one kind of made me take a little pause and say, what is our learning intention? And then I thought back, okay,
I know you're going to
So it is actually just a single.
Even keeping track of
Okay, as you're having these conversations, what were some of the science concepts or skills that you pulled out of this lesson? What are some of the science concepts or skills? Yes?
I wasn't paying attention. Rephrase your question.
What are some of the science concepts and skills?
So the slides, you're looking at a biological idea of looking at the seeds, and then, but you're also looking at like more physics concepts of how is it moving and working.
Okay.
So science, that's how you get that one.
Perfect. So really integrate that life science and the physical science. Depending on what your backgrounds were, you went to different levels of that. Some of you, those of you that are in high school experiences, were jumping into some of the centrifugal forces and other pieces to it. Others were focusing on it from a lot of the life science concepts in a kindergarten 1-2 level. Yes?
I think it also had a lot of those cross-cutting concepts.
Thank you.
DCIs, they were really big in this kind of experience.
Sure. What were some of the cross-cutting concepts you saw there?
Well, cause and effect.
Mhm.
And we also thought mathematically it had something to do with ratios and proportions, because based upon the proportion, what the ratio was of the wings to the stem.
Sure. And there's one other cross-cutting concept I really tried to hit hard with this one.
Oh, yes.
Structure and function. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Any science practices? Okay. Build models. Okay. How about the engineering? We'll jump down to that one, because we didn't dive into necessarily the biomimicry parts of the technology aspects of it. But how about the engineering? What were some of the parts of engineering that you experienced with this? Mm-hmm.
Well, even the data that we shared would influence our design.
Okay.
I mean, not necessarily true at our table, but.
Perfect. Perfect. So utilize the data to influence the design to varying levels of success.
Yes.
Okay.
We talked about trade-off with the weight of the heavier paper be enough trade-off to keep the wings stiff and therefore spin better than the lighter paper. So just trade-off in the materials.
Sure. So with the different materials, having those trade-offs to it. Mm-hmm.
And revisions, which is such a big part of learning and enjoying learning, is making those revisions.
Sure. Yeah, those iterations. I heard a word as you're working through this that kind of made me cringe a little bit, but I understand why it was used. Failure. And I think failures, I mean, yes, they were not successful. Some of these, they did fail. But right, we learned from it. I think it's really about how do we utilize that. I mean, we still utilize an F as a grade in many of our schools, yet failure, we see it as an opportunity. And as we talk about writing, first drafts are always that initial place to start with. And what I really see with a lot of the engineering is it's our first draft, our second draft, our third draft, and eventually we'll find a draft that's going to work out for us. If you use that word failure, really think about how it's being used in other contexts, because that part with engineering is certainly part of it. We learn from it, but how is that framed for students and for families to really understand? Mm-hmm.
I know that Stanford, in their design school, their D-Lab, they talk about failing forward.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually cheer. This didn't work because of this, so now I know this.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. That failing forward, and eventually we don't want to celebrate failures anymore. Eventually we do have to have that final product, but you're right. If we can learn from it, that's fantastic. How about mathematics? What mathematics concepts or skills?
averages sometimes.
Okay. Measurement?
Trying to optimize it. They did different measurements. They were trying to optimize mathematically. I think Nate was talking about like, what is this relationship to try to figure out where is the optimum?
Sure. So linear or different types of relationships there?
Building charts and graphs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like these have
Averages?
data had a bit of like a curve to it. You can find the sweet spot.
Sure. So we could have taken a little bit more time to dive into some of that data analytic piece and really looked at that aspect of the different graphs that I know over here we had a graph. I think we had a graph over here, and start to be able to look at some of the lines for that. You know, one of the as I was preparing this, really knowing that many of our concepts take a lot of time to develop, mathematically or science, and with this being a short experience, really focusing it back into the practices. And so looking at the science practices, the engineering, which are defined certainly in your SEED standards. They are a part of the framework for K-12 science education. Technology, which comes out of some of the ISTE standards, and the mathematics for MCTM, or NCTM, we see these practices really permeate the different activities. And engaging students in these practices, I think, are really critical for the connections. And being very purposeful about how you talk about them. You'll see that when we're moving into the activity, I said, I think 3 or 4 times, make sure you tend to precision, that you are being very careful with your measurements and making sure that as you are conducting your experiment that you're being thoughtful in that. And I know that felt a little bit rigid at times, but what I was really coming back to is engaging in these practices. And the same thing that as I was having you use those talk statements, that was really around constructing explanations and engaging in argument. And so giving a framework for doing that. I could have been a little more intentional with how I talked about that, but this is one of the opportunities I think that is a low-hanging fruit for a lot of the teachers to start to engage in thinking about how are they engaging these practices as cross-disciplinary, particularly if you have a lesson that this one, a little bit more focused within the science to start off with the phenomenon. Some of the phenomenons might be more focused in mathematics at times. Others you might be starting from a reverse engineering standpoint. And so as you're taking a look at that and thinking about those practices and how do you help to reinforce and support those across there. And I think this afternoon you're going to be diving a little bit more into some practices for this. Oh, this really did not come up very well in there. Can we turn down the light up in the front here? The case for STEM education that I believe you all have that Roger Bobby wrote influenced a lot of my thinking, as well as going around and exploring STEM schools around the country. And as I take a look at STEM schools, I really see these integrated STEM in 4 different approaches. And it's not a better than or less than type of approach. It's really thinking about what is our vision, what is our desire for STEM education, and where are we going with that. And so, you know, one of the places we start with is teaching the standards from our own domain, making connections and integrating those knowledge and processes from the other domains, and looking at pedagogy that explores relevant real-world context. This is really where this activity today started us in. It was making some intentional connections across the disciplines, but it was focused specifically from one of the science standards. This is a place of starting for many schools, and in some cases this is a place that you decide that you really are focused on, and to be able to make connections across disciplines is the most important aspect that you're trying to instill in your staff. Sometimes you're looking at really going beyond that and looking at how are you recognizing concepts and processes from other domains. And this is where you're being very intentional with the content that you have from the different disciplines. And you probably have learning targets that you're bringing in from multiple different subjects. This is where you might be bringing in both a math and a science concept that you're melding together and being very intentional about how are you instructing and assessing, whether it's summative or formative for those different concepts. concepts. And so Bybee talks about, in the case for STEM education, that this is correlating the standards, correlating that learning, looking at the opportunities to interact with other teachers, so that when I was a middle school teacher, I knew what was happening in the social studies classroom or what was happening in the language arts classroom, so that I was being very intentional with how I was building my lesson to either introduce or reinforce some of the concepts there, and making those intentional. The school-based STEM integration is what we see from some schools. This is where you're being very purposeful about coordinating and complementing. And so you're building that scope and sequence. So rather than having your scope and sequence for science, having your scope and sequence for math, having your scope and sequence for career and technical education, you're really building all these pieces together. And you're connecting each of the different courses so that they build upon each other. In the scope and sequence, you have made specific identifications of where those standards introduced, where are they reinforced, bringing those components to be very mindful by the teachers and be able to communicate that to parents. Sometimes we see this in terms of thematic, problem-based, project-based, phenomenon-based, could be put into this as well, where you're using these contexts for that learning that goes beyond the disciplines. This is where we see a lot of schools that really want to be very intentional with their STEM programming in elementary and middle school, working toward. Oops. And then the final one is interdisciplinary, and so we are connecting them together. This is where you combine disciplines. High school that I was working at, we had our construction trades teacher and our physics teacher working together, and they had a co-taught, co-listed class and received both CTE and science credit for that. Right now we're designing a statewide course in Minnesota that's a foods-based chemistry. We also have one that we're developing, a manufacturing-based Algebra 2 class to help to support the connections of learning. And this is really where we start to try to break down some of the walls in secondary education, although we see some of this in elementary as well. And so there's the integrated STEM courses. Now it's important though when you do that to really start to think about what is being integrated there. And so we see different classes that have STEM physics, STEM math, STEM technology. As I was talking about the classes, I was talking about the foods-based chemistry and the construction trades Algebra 2, being intentional about what are we actually bringing together there, and not just using STEM as a acronym that to describe everything that's happening in our school. So that naming is really, really important. So this is something where I really work with our schools to start their conversations. An example is one of the schools took this and thought about really as they were working through that their focus was on interdisciplinary approach. Looking at how those were being really connected together so that there was a cohesive teaching and learning experience. They were very thoughtful in terms of the scope and sequence with planning with it. They focused around inquiry-based. Again, this might be project-based, this might be phenomenon-based for schools as well, but they had done quite a bit of training around inquiry, and so saw that as the pedagogical foundation for them. And then thinking about having project-based that was working with their community, which again, that last part of community focus, so that they were actually intentionally designing them to meet the needs of their community. And so this is an example of how a school started to take these ideas and build them together in terms of thinking about what is our vision. So from that, they start to dive into looking at, okay, well, how do we manifest this? What actual steps do we have so it becomes more than just a talking point? And Ricky, do you want to hand out these here? And I have a copy of the template for you that we've used for this. We're a little bit short on time, so we're not going to take time to dive into this, but I'll be around later today and happy to talk with you about this tool that we utilize. It really starts to think about, it starts with the vision on the top and identifies where it is we're going. It identifies who do we have engaged in this process, who are our stakeholders. So going back to that initial piece about bringing together all the voices that are going to be impacted from this work. And then diving into actually what does it look like? What is the curriculum that we have identified? Sometimes this is something, so for mathematics, they were developing some open education resources, realizing that they really were not finding textbooks that were strong with the real world connections. So in Minnesota, 54 out of our 81 standards, K-12, use the words real world. And so that's an important context that we want schools to really be thinking about with their mathematics. So they developed their own for that. They had FOSS and National Geographic for science, but then they modified them to meet the standards. So they were intentional about how what curriculum they had and how that built into their vision. The instruction, looking at phenomenon-based inquiry, the science and engineering practices, the math evidence-based practices. So we have evidence-based practices that we have identified with working with the state of Michigan. That is a part of the instruction. And these are, when they go back to saying what training, what professional development, it all goes back to the instruction. And how does that relate in there? And you'll see that in terms of the professional development that they've identified. And so they had their kickoff days, their orientation. Then they engaged with the Science Museum around some of the inquiry instruction. They had the planning days with their STEM teachers and Classroom of the Future's COF. It was their coaches that they brought in. So they wanted to be math coaches or science coaches or STEM coaches, but really wanted to have them be thinking forward in terms of engagement with the community and other points with that. And then that professional development all kind of went back into those first columns. Thinking about the partnerships that they were starting to bring in, higher ed, bringing in informal education institutions, really thinking about businesses that are brought into that work as well. Looking at what support mechanisms that they have in place so that, again, STEM is for all students, and it's not just a set-aside class that certain students are going into. And then thinking about their evaluation. And so they identified that they were going to have a pre-post survey. Actually, they did 3 times a year. They did a fall, a winter, and a end of the year survey to talk with parents and students and get an idea of the effectiveness or what they were missing with their vision. They looked at their number of certifications. So specifically, they had a really strong community connection, and so they were looking at the industry and certifications that were awarded. And then they also looked at assessments. The last piece, which was personal for this district, so I didn't put it in here, but it's on your sheet as well, is thinking about if it's something that we are prioritizing, if it's something that is about who we are, it's our vision, we're thinking about how are we really focusing our funding for that. And so thinking about federal funds such as Title IV, Title I, looking at Perkins funding for secondary schools, looking at state funding that has been identified specifically for things such as concurrent enrollment, looking at state funding around the per pupil, looking at gifted and talented funding. So we have per pupil gifted and talented funds for a district, looking at local funds and levy and other dollars that are there. So bringing in and being intentional about how do you really bundle the funds or braid the funds so that it continues to move toward that. And so this template is really what we use to take from an experience, move the vision forward to actual action steps. And whether it's helpful for you or not, it's there. I'll also send it to be in the Google Doc for you as well. But our schools have found that it's helpful. It's something that they use with their leadership teams and they revisit at least twice a year, and that their school boards are engaged with over time as well. So this is a process. This is something that is important to bring in stakeholders and important to continue to refine the vision. One thing I'll just kind of come back to, though, is, again, this is not something new. And if anything, I think that that's something that I think that we need to be understanding of. And there's so many different places we can tie this back to. I talked about John Dewey earlier. But in Nation at Risk, it highlighted that the ideas and practices of science, mathematics, and technology are so closely intertwined that we do not see how education, any one of them, can be undertaken well in isolation from others. So if we're truly going to start to look at how are we engaging and helping students learn through all the disciplines, we need to find ways to intertwine them in ways that are meaningful, authentic, and personal to the students and communities that we have in front of us. So I hope it was helpful for you today to start to frame some of your ideas. I think you guys are just doing a fantastic job here in your state and in your districts. It's a state that I look at quite a bit for innovation for our state, as I know you guys are always ahead of the curve, and I look forward to seeing how you take your schools with this as well. If I can provide anything for you, my email and my Twitter are on there. Happy to help to provide for you. I'll be around the rest of today, and just thank you for your energy and your thoughtfulness today. So I think with that, I think we're at lunch, so I'll give you announcements.
So let's give Doug a round of applause.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate that.